Okay, guys, we are going to jump into the idea of imperialism here in this next section. And so for this couple of chapters, we're going to merge a little bit in chapter 27 and 28 together. We're going to be talking about the growth of many different countries and how they're going to extend their influence over other peoples and other nationalities by their brute force. That's really the idea of imperialism. It's almost like a bullying of everybody else to get what you want. Now, many times it's going to be the big nations that are going to be picking on the little nations, and they're trying to force their way by using whatever means necessary in order to do so. So we begin here, imperialism. We're going to jump into a couple different countries. European culture is going to expand all over the world. And at this point of the time period, we have European influence all over the place. So just to give you some of that background information, we've come out of the Revolution period, both the French and the American Revolution. We went through the industrial era where we have growth of cities, we have new technologies being developed, and now we have imperialism. So as countries grow and as they start building a stronger foundation through industrialization, they also have more money. As they have more money, they build up their navies, their military. They expand around the globe. They start gaining control over different colonies and different smaller countries, and they're going to extend that culture all over the place. We're going to begin here talking about the United States. For this particular video, we're going to talk about three different parts of the world. We're going to talk about the United States, Great Britain, and Latin America. And so that's the order in which we're going to go here for this section. So in the United States, they are growing. They begin in 1776, gaining their independence or declaring their independence from Great Britain. They started off with 13 small colonies. Of course, they are going to expand here in 1803 by purchasing the Louisiana Territory. Now, that is purchased by Thomas Jefferson, and he buys that even though it goes against his own convictions on how the Constitution was written. He did not believe that an American president had the power to do anything that was not specifically outlined in the Constitution, yet buying more land or increasing the size of the country was not specifically in there. He went ahead and did it anyway. He thought it was the best thing for the country. He was ridiculed. He was called a hypocrite for this move. However, he did what was best for the country, not what was best for his political career. So they buy it from France for very, very cheap because Napoleon had Louisiana Territory. He had dreams of expanding over into the Americas, and that was where he was, once he had conquered Europe, he was going to expand over there, and he was going to start another empire over in the New World, perhaps even conquering the young United States. But because his wars were dragging out, especially over in Russia, he was running out of money. He needed money quick and easy, and so he gave the power to his finance minister to negotiate with the United States. They came to an agreement, and well, the rest is history. America bought it. They got a great deal out of this, 3 cents an acre for Louisiana Territory. America also expands as they annex Mexican land. I wish that was any better than it sounds. Essentially, America stole a whole bunch of that land. They took it in and claimed it as their own. I don't have a whole lot of time to go into that right here. That'll happen a little bit more in American history, but some of that land that once belonged to the Mexican people now comes to the hands of the Americans, and they take that on. They also buy Alaska. This one was purchased by an agreement from Russia. This was purchased the 1860s, if I remember correctly, and this was William Seward who purchased this. He was the Secretary of State for Abraham Lincoln. This was viewed as a really bad mistake when it was done in the first place. Everybody thought Alaska is just a big ice cube. Nobody wants it. And so we got ripped off by the Russians. Once they found oil and gold there, it turned out to be an amazing deal. So those are some areas where the United States is expanding. They also, because of their expansion, they also had to deal with other countries, and they had to figure out how they were going to handle all the things happening in Europe. Clearly, there's conflict going on in Europe. As those countries are reforming and as they're reshaping, the United States just says, we don't want anything to do with that. We want peace and quiet. Leave us alone over here on our own continent. And so President James Monroe establishes the Monroe Doctrine. And essentially, he isolated America to keep America out of any sort of unnecessary alliance. Now, this was the advice that George Washington gave in his final address to the people as president as he was leaving office. He challenged America not to get involved in entangling alliances. So James Monroe establishes this as the policy that will be the American policy for nearly 100 years, where America will not sign treaties and alliances with other countries. And we say that we are going to be concerned with our affairs here in the United States as long as Europe stays concerned with their affairs over in Europe. We don't want to intermix any of those affairs back and forth. So leave us out of your wars. We don't want to be a part of it. And this also sent a message to Europe telling them, keep your hands off of anything in the North American continent. We have it handled, so stay away. American isolation is challenged when Napoleon III, he put French troops into Mexico. As they come in here, that is a direct violation of the Monroe Doctrine. Now keep in mind that was not a treaty. Nobody in Europe actually agreed to this. It was just, we declared it, they had to follow it. So when that is challenged by the French, America has to decide how to respond. Spain also gets involved as Spain tries to lure America into war in 1898, which eventually does lead to the Spanish-American War. Long story short on this one, Spain was in bad shape at this point. They were depleted in their navy, and their military was not strong, and it was really not a huge war by the time it was all said and done. America was able to take care of this pretty easily. That led President Roosevelt, this would be Theodore Roosevelt, who issued the Roosevelt Corollary. This was an addition. Corollary is like that tack it on at the end type of idea to the Monroe Doctrine. And so the Roosevelt Corollary stated that America is now going to defend all of the Latin American countries. We are going to take them under our wing and offer them our protection. Isn't that nice? We are such a good big brother to Latin America. Well, if you're the Latin American country and all of a sudden you have this big bad United States saying, hey, we're going to protect you so nobody else get involved, that does a couple of things. Number one, that is going to tell you that you don't have a say in your own sovereignty, that America is now making your decisions for you. And secondly, that also means that if you wanted to sign a treaty or make an alliance with a European country, or you wanted to trade with them without American interference, that's not going to be possible any longer. But they didn't have a whole lot they could do about it. They weren't big enough to be able to go after the United States and to defend themselves against this. So that becomes a policy for a number of years for the United States, and as the graphic shows there, Uncle Sam is defending South America by any means necessary. Now we're going to move on here and talk about Great Britain. The British are going to have a number of colonies around the world besides what we typically think of as the American colonies. They're also going to have them in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. And so I'm going to run you through a few things that happened there with them very quickly. So in Canada, of course, we talked about the French and Indian War that turned over a lot of that territory to Great Britain. So France had that at one point. Now Great Britain has control over it, and they are going to establish their own rule over the people that are living in Canada. In 1774, the Quebec Act was passed by British Parliament. This allowed all the French Canadians to practice their language, their customs, their religion, and that way they did not have to become British. They were under British authority and British rule, but they did not have to adopt the British way of life. It seems like a pretty good thing. But that continued to fester some problems between the French and the British who were living in Canada. So you've got a mixture of cultures, and the French don't want to become British, and the British don't really like the French being there, but the French were there first. And so it really didn't solve any issues, but it was a government attempt to make things better there. In 1867, Parliament signs the British North America Act. This gives Canada its self-government. Now, they're still under the authority of the British rule and the British Empire, but they can now elect their own prime minister and they can make some of their own laws, but they all have to be under the approval of the British authorities. So that was the first step for Canada in gaining its freedom and independence from Great Britain. Now let's move on to Australia. This once again was a colony of the British at one time. It goes all the way back to 1770, where James Cook gives the British claim to Australia. And originally this was established as a prison when the Georgia colony was no longer available. So after the colonies in the United States, or the American colonies there, started to organize and prepare for war, it was very clear that pretty soon the British were going to have to find another place to dump all their undesirables and make a prison. So they found this giant island known as Australia. They thought that'd be a great place to move all those people. The Commonwealth of Australia is formed in 1901, and this is a formation of all the colonies that had been there in Australia coming together and making their own country. We look at New Zealand, just to the southeast of Australia, just a little bit. In New Zealand, it was first used as a refuge by escaped convicts or deserters coming from Australia. And so that was originally a prison. Then people who escaped or deserted or left, they would go there to New Zealand. So this was not a real great place to live. Think about all the people that would have flocked there. The Maoris were the native people who were already in New Zealand that were somewhat invaded by all these undesirable characters that were coming there. Eventually, here in 1907, New Zealand is given self-government or establishes their own self-government. They are still under the British Empire in 1907, but they are on their way to independence very quickly. Notice here a theme. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, all three of these British colonies were moving toward independence, and Great Britain was willing to give them that. It tells you a lot about the way that the world was changing and the way that dominance and control over other countries was morphing into, instead of a heavy hand over top of all these countries, it was now a movement towards self-government, but still under the umbrella of the authority of the British Empire. As we move on here to South Africa, the British took over this colony from the Dutch during the Napoleonic Wars. It was originally settled by the Netherlands, and when Napoleon was fighting, he gained control because he conquered the Netherlands colonies here. There is a group of people known as the Boers. These were the original Dutch colonists that had come, and they had come to South Africa for the purpose of farming. And when the British took over, the Boers did not care for the British rule. Of course, they are Dutch, being ruled by another group of people. Not a happy place. And so many of the Boers got fed up with the rule of the government there, and so that launched the Great Trek. This was a migration of the Boers out of the British-controlled areas. Many of them packed up, moved their stuff, and started getting out of there. Well, that eventually led to the Boer War. So as the Boers tried to get up, leave, go find new territory, they found that new territory, but in that territory, diamonds were discovered, which we'd think that'd be a great thing. However, when that news catches wind, when the British catch wind of that news, they go after that territory. And so in 1867, diamonds were discovered there. In 1886, gold was discovered there, and here come the British. They want the gold, they want the diamonds. And this wasn't necessarily the military, this was British citizens that were coming for wealth. They wanted to get rich quick. And so it eventually grows into more and more tension, fighting breaks out, and now comes the British military. The British win, they gain control of the area, and eventually this part of South Africa is merged together under the umbrella of the British Empire and is created to become South Africa. That's also why there's a lot of Caucasian white people in South Africa. It's not what we typically think of as the African American in that part of the world. Then we get to Latin America. Latin America is characterized by political instability. So in Latin America, we begin to see individual nations form and gain their independence. However, they have some significant problems with self-government. They are unable to organize very well. When they do organize, they are often overthrown by others, or their people don't follow the government. There's just a lot of chaos and a lot of problems here. They try to follow the American pattern, but they're not successful. And so there are a lot of theories as to why that is. We're not going to get into all of those right now, but many of them unfortunately went through revolution after revolution. So because there was political instability, many people had risen to the top as the wealthy, the upper class in these countries, and as they do, they take over ownership of the land and they have the majority of the wealth. And as these people have a monopoly of the land, they force the people that are underneath them to work the land for low wages, and it really causes a lot of stress. The Roman Catholic Church has a major hold on the people here, and so all the things we've talked about with the Roman Catholic Church are going to apply in here, and the people are really enslaved to the dominance of the Roman Catholic Church. There's a lot of disunity among the people. Many different ethnic groups, many different cultures have merged here, and some have lived here for a long time, others are more recent, and so because of that, there's a lot of racial disunity. And so that leads to many other conflicts that happen. Countries go to war with one another, there's border disputes, there's government disputes, trade disputes, all kinds of things cause these conflicts to lead to bigger and bigger wars. South America is characterized by economic weakness as well. They relied on only a few products to hold up their economy. Rather than creating a number of different products and selling them all over the globe, they have one or two items that they do really well. And so if something were to happen to that product, their economy is going to suffer. One of those products was bananas, and bananas grow really well in South America, and so if people want bananas, you're going to be making a lot of money. But if all of a sudden there's a drought, or if people stop wanting bananas, you can't sell them, they're just going to sit there and rot, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. Coffee was another one of these that they put a lot of investment in. They could grow really well. But instead of growing coffee and bananas, they would pick one, and they would just sell one, and they would just produce one. And that was a major weakness. And some of that, there's natural limitations. There are certain products that will not grow in this part of the world. So that still is a current and existing problem for many South American countries. Well, both the United States and Europe dip their hand into South America, seeing that there is money to be made there, seeing that there's political and economic weakness. The United States jumps in. We've already talked about the Roosevelt Corollary. And Europe also jumps in. We talked about Napoleon III bringing people into Mexico. And this is just going to cause more division and more problems for the people in South America.